The topic is finding closure and moving forward. It's sort of this focus on life after surrogacy, which you get a lot of information and all this good stuff about, like, here's surrogacy, here's how it's going to be like, here's how you can prepare, here's how it will be during. And I think like as a field, we fall short on like, here's what's going to happen after. Here's what it could possibly look like and feel like. And so that's my hope with this conversation, is to open up some of those perspectives, some of those considerations, and hopefully with your participations and with your shares, you can help me richen this up by sharing what was it like for you, or fears that you have, or things that you're excited for. And really that's the hope with this topic. Okay, so I'm Dr. Sadaf. Again, I'm from Embra Health. Fun fact, I'm a prior egg donor. I also went through the surrogacy process. I didn't actually get to make it across the other side of legal. My intended parents, I was screened for this a long time ago, but the parents that I matched with got pregnant, unexplained, after 7 years of unexplained infertility, got pregnant, had their child, and then I got pregnant like 7 months after that. And we have contact and our kids know each other. And it's just I'm not a surrogate. I don't align with that, but I have a connection to surrogacy greatly because I got a really special relationship from this. And so as a personal, on my personal side and my professional side, this is just really important to me, especially the mental health stuff. So I'm going to start with the unexpected endings that may or may not happen for some, when there's a hope, there's a desire, there's a life change to become a surrogate, and you may not make it to the finish line, and what that could mean, how that looks like, how that could affect you. Actually want to go back and take a quick sort of poll. I would love to know who's in the room. For those of you who are here, can you give me a little glimpse of like where you're at? Are you at the beginning stages of a journey? Are you in a journey? Did you just finish up a journey? Are you on your second, on your third? Can you just kind of pop in and share, just so I can get some perspective on how to tailor this?
Hi, I am 9 months postpartum as of yesterday, but I'm also recently officially matched with my new couple on journey number 2. So just waiting to hear from the clinic so that I can move forward with medical screening.
Awesome.
And I delivered a surro-baby in February, so I'm about 6 months postpartum.
Okay, glad you're here.
Yes, I was 20 weeks and I lost baby boy. This is my second surrogacy journey.
Thank you for sharing that, Brittany. Glad you're here too.
I'm just in the beginning stages. I got through the psychologist appointment. I'm not matched yet, just in the beginning.
Gotcha.
Very beginning. Yeah.
Thank you. That helps me. I'm sort of seeing the whole spectrum, so that's great. Okay, unexpected endings. Common reasons why a journey might end before completion. There are a lot. You're thinking first, the most important things, right? The medical and the fertility challenges. So here we're considering failed cycles. We're talking about complications that might prevent continuing. These are all those like uncontrollables usually, where science is just not working in your favor. And, you know, we talk about failed cycles as a normal thing in surrogacy. It's in your contracts. It's something to expect. You're kind of prepped and primed to think, okay, I'm going to have to do this possibly 3 times. But I think what gets severely underlooked is like one failed cycle is a loss. And like the second is a loss too. And although there's sort of this narrative that, yes, we're going to try 3 times and we all agree upon that, we also forget that those failed cycles, whatever the reason may be, if it's a blighted ovum, if it's just, it didn't take, if there's a miscarriage involved, those are losses. And so that can emotionally just create complexities on either side as a carrier or for the intended parents that may or may not affect the health of a match. And so when you are seeing match breaks around medical components, you know, you're thinking about those considerations when there has been something like a termination or a miscarriage or a pregnancy loss. You're also wanting to consider and think about those at that level of a failed cycle, because just the pure baseline of this is it's loss. And with however much hope you can have as a carrier to be a surrogate, to do this special thing for someone else, and for the intended parents to become parents, to have someone invested in their journey in this way, loss, grief, that stuff is heavy and thick and can muddy any water. And that can be really harmful to a healthy match. And what I refer to when I say healthy match is a match that everyone feels protected and safe and aligned with. And, you know, when that's not necessarily the case, there's a lot of potential for risk in the health of that match. You're also thinking about life changes when you're considering either match breaks or journeys not making it to the end, where things can just start to look different. The thing about surrogacy is life still happens outside of surrogacy. That doesn't stop or change or is kinder to you because you're going through surrogacy. So this could look like career shifts. This could look like different family needs, financial strain, relationship changes. We see all of it, unfortunately. And on the carrier's end, you also want to be cognizant that, like, again, this is something that's going to affect your life, and your life is still going to do whatever it's doing anyway. So if you're having challenges in your relationship, if you have a child that's sick, if you have other things pulling you in different directions, adding surrogacy onto your plate might not be like a healthy emotional or physical option. And this can be the exact same sort of perspective on the intended parent side. Oftentimes you'll see intended parents who may or may not decide to break a match for reasons of their own within their relationship and having challenges in their relationship dynamic. Finance is a big part of this. So the financial component can come in and interfere as well. But the life aspects, I think we forget to think about, that there will still be a lot happening, and how life likes to work, unpredictabilities may come your way. You do want to just sort of cognitively prepare for those, but also consider that I might not get to the point that I wanted to get or expect to get because life might come in the way. And sort of to have that as an accepted baseline is a really healthy starting point. Match disruptions. This is where you're seeing like intended parents who are withdrawing. This is where communication's breaking down. This is where the relationship dynamics that we started with are now looking very different. Expectations are incompatible or becoming too intense. And this happens for many reasons. Who your intended parent is, the kind of relationship with your intended parents that you have. In the beginning, it's sort of like everyone's seeing through rose-colored glasses in a way. We all want to see the best of this experience. We want to hope for the best of this experience. And it's sometimes harder to think about those what ifs or those tricky situations in the front. But as you continue to build a relationship, I mean, on top of life happening and on top of the medical components that may or may not happen, it can get just really emotionally complex. And if we're discussing a match break, or if we're talking about, hey, we need to step away from this at this time from either end, it's oftentimes because this is quite a huge emotional experience. I think sometimes as an industry, we allude to this version of surrogacy that's like the rainbows and butterfly version of like, this is going to be lovely and it's just full of love and everyone's happy and it goes great. And we hope for that. And we want that. And we do see that. The reality that exists within this world is this is pregnancy. This is medicine. This is human beings in their most raw emotional state. This is so much complexity. And so the real version of this can look very different, and you just want to be honest and open to that. But match disruptions usually come about when, yes, you're seeing those real versions of how different people connect with each other and maybe start to disconnect. For intended parents, it's also important to recognize that your intended parents may be coming to the surrogacy process with a bunch of their own stuff. As a surrogate, you may be coming into this experience thinking, I've had good pregnancies, I like being pregnant, I want to help my family, this would be a great help to my family. It's mostly positive, you coming into surrogacy as a carrier. On the IP side, not necessarily the case. They may be bringing a ton of challenges, emotional trauma, experiences that have been negative, bad associations with pregnancy. They may be coming in with heaviness. And so for them, it's a different ballgame. And sometimes those disconnects get really loud and clear depending on what's happening. And intended parent behavior, for the most part, can be explained by that. Just knowing that they have a whole different version of pregnancy that they've witnessed or that they've never seen before. And there may be points where that's going to collide with yours. Why this loss is especially hard, especially as a gestational carrier, I think what I was just speaking to a carrier and she said this, and I think this rings true. For many carriers, it's almost like it's selfish if I grieve this. This isn't my biological child. Why would I shouldn't be given space and time to be sad. This is not for me. Or that shame aspect of feeling like I couldn't do this for them. I couldn't help them. I wasn't good enough for this or for them. They don't appreciate me. And these are things that I'm talking about when we're talking about like a match break or ending a journey too soon. What I will say to counter that is, as carriers, I have a deep belief that you are guardians. Like this is the experience of who you are in these intended parents' lives and who you are for this child. And the bond that you build with this child is a guardian bond. You care deeply and you want to protect them and care for them and reunite them with their family. If there's a loss in this experience, it is your loss. And it's not only just your physical loss, which is obviously what would be happening, but it's your emotional loss too. It's losing someone that you cared about and that you were protecting and that you were caring for. And that any sort of loss comes with that grief and comes with that heaviness. How you manage and handle grief is going to look very different, but it is grief. And so why this can be particularly hard is that it often is this experience of like something you have to hide. Like I am sad, I am broken, I am devastated, but I feel like I'm not allowed to be, so I have to hide it. And the world also may not see it as a loss because, yeah, that wasn't your biological child. Why are you sad? But they don't understand that this is still a loss for you as someone who has invested your time, energy, your life, your future, all the sacrifices you've sort of made to make yourself available and helpful in this way. And the thing with that is there's a lot of preparation and planning with surrogacy. I mean, for many of you, you've likely thought about this for a while. Like this wasn't just something that you saw yesterday and then you applied and now you're a surrogate. You've talked to your families, you've talked to your children, you've talked to your employers, like you've talked to people, you've made this part of your life in the future, you've kind of planned things out. And when it doesn't go according to that plan, what happens? Like it shifts the next year or two that you had thought through. And what do we do now? And that can be a huge loss as well. Just like feeling the loss of this goal, this personal priority that you had made that's no longer available to you. I also really like to touch on the fact that this affects your identity. And being a surrogate is a powerful addition to your identity. I think those who can add surrogate as part of who they are and how they explain themselves are incredibly lucky people. And it's an amazing thing to do for someone. And there's quite a loss that's felt when you can't say that. And you feel like you cannot connect to this aspect of I was a surrogate or I am a surrogate. There's a loss of identity there, and that can shift your whole thing, right? Like anything else, like that could shift how you feel about yourself, what you believe about yourself, what the future looks like for you, who you are, what your purpose is. That could affect all of that. And so I'm highlighting this because I really want to nail it down that like a match break or ending prematurely is a loss and it is grief and it is something that you shouldn't be ignoring at all. It should be looked at right in the face and it should be recognized and supported. And we'll kind of talk about that as we keep talking. I know someone in here had mentioned that they have experienced a recent loss. I'm curious if anyone wants to share or add about what else comes up when you think about either possibility or the experience of ending a journey short. And this is like a very vulnerable first question, but please know I think you're very brave.
I'll chime in.
Thank you.
So I had delivered the surro-baby in February, and I feel like my experience is kind of broken into two journeys. So I delivered the baby in February, and that journey was amazing. It was beautiful. But before that, I was matched with another couple, and we had the first transfer was a failed transfer. The second was a blighted ovum. So we experienced that like, moment of excitement and hope, and then like the sudden end. And that was really hard for a lot of reasons. But by that point, my relationship with the IPs was a little, trying to think of how to say this, was a little on edge. It felt like there was some blame directed towards me, which is hard. As surrogates, we already, I think, tend to blame ourselves if something doesn't go right.
Right.
And when the blighted ovum was discovered, it was like an abrupt end on the IP side. Even before the DNC, they broke match, and they didn't check in on me after the DNC and everything. So that was very hard because I thought we were building this relationship. And like you mentioned, you kind of assume there's going to be 3 tries, but
Right.
you don't always get to a 3rd try.
Right.
So that was hard. But I think for me, one of my thoughts was after that happened, I didn't want the end of my journey to be because of someone else's decision to break match. I wanted it to be because I decided like, I can't do this anymore, or this is harder than I thought, or my family can't handle this anymore. So I didn't feel like I was at that point where I was ready to give up on it. And that was really important to me, to just feel like if it did end there without the happy ending, it's because I decided to. So luckily we were able to move on with another couple, and then from there on, it was great. So
Yeah.
I have a wide variety of experience
Yeah.
in how journeys can end.
And I appreciate a lot of what you've shared, especially that, like, there's that instinct to like blame yourself when something goes wrong, and how quickly that comes to mind, especially for a carrier going through some of these ebbs and flows. I also appreciate in your story that like you're recognizing like a failed cycle. We talk about it plainly, like, yep, there's going to be 3 and you might have a failed cycle or 2, but like those are not easy things to just physically and mentally move from. And to your point in your example, like your second experience of a cycle that ended up in a blighted ovum, that was like the straw for everyone, or for your IPs, that like that was just too much, too heavy, and they couldn't go on. It's like we're dealing with life, and someone's future child is in this mix, and it's so heavy, and of course it's heavy for the intended parent, but I also just, I'm highlighting, and Katie, you're helping me highlight that like this is also very heavy for you, and it's because it's so important to you too. And I think it's just like magical that there are women like you who prioritize someone else's family in this way, and then feel the pain that they feel. And you're signing up for this too, by the way, like no one's forcing you to do this, but like it is something to be recognized, and it is something to be highly aware of in your experience, and in terms of what you need. Thanks, Katie. Anyone else want to share before I move forward? Just like thoughts and feelings that come with this unexpected end experience.
I was going to say, I have a similar experience to you, Katie, where I had a 1 failed cycle, and then I shifted to a new set of intended parents. My journey ended 5 years with an agency that was not very ethical. So anything I share is not normal, and should not be normal when you're with an ethical agency. But that loss was strange because it was just a transactional shift of, this isn't working, the intended parents, we're not getting along with them, etc. So we're doing a new match. And that was just very weird in itself. You've built this idea of this relationship you're going to build with a certain couple, and then you have to release that and be like, do I continue that relationship or just shift on to this new one? And you kind of have to focus on the new one because that's where the new match lies. And so I did that. But what was really mostly challenging in the loss is that expected relationship and what you may have wanted, where I wanted a very close relationship, and so did my intended parents. And unfortunately, with our agency, they had a negative, I don't know why, but they had a negative connotation on our relationship and how much. And so they were at one point telling my intended parents to not get me gifts and such, and that they would be spoiling me in that sense. And so that loss was very strange to me, because there was this weird just idea of, we're going to have this really close relationship, and now we're ending it on this awkward note. And so what could have been really beautiful and very inclusive and thoughtful ended up being more transactional, and not what either of us wanted, just because it was actually out of our control with the agency. And thankfully, once the journey concluded, we talked about it, and we shared awarenesses that we didn't even know that we both were having, and we were able to develop a better relationship. But still, that lack throughout the journey, and that loss and what we could have had more in on milestones and such, just wasn't possible.
Like, the IP perspectives are so helpful with this, right? Because you're only seeing it from your end as a carrier, and sort of what you're expecting and what you maybe have been promised in some ways by like an agency or a person who's there to support you. And like, the intended parent side is so hard to grasp. Obviously, with most match breaks or journeys ending, there's a higher percentage of the IPs are pulling out than the carrier. And there's all these reasons for that. I also want to paint that picture of like, there are very valid reasons for a carrier to also withdraw from a matcher experience. And like, both you, Sam, and Katie are pointing to some experience where like, that was really hard for me. And I do want to send that message that like, should you have this experience as a carrier where you're going through a loss, or you're feeling this certain way in your relationship dynamic that's maybe just not comfortable, not safe. I mean, those are things not to ignore in a match. I'm going to keep going here. So, closure strategies, when you're sort of faced with this unexpected end. My whole mentality on this is, you have to treat this like you would loss. Loss is such a big, broad word. It's my favorite word because it's so present in our lives, and we only like to associate loss with like someone passing away or like a major event happening, but it is part of our everyday in some way, and it doesn't have to be this big, scary, sticky thing. We could have a positive relationship with loss as long as we kind of understand how it works with us. But in this, you're experiencing, as a carrier whose journey is ending short, you're experiencing the loss of this identity. You may be experiencing the loss of your desire to have another pregnancy, the desire to help someone. These are heavy, heavy losses. It's really important to treat this like you would any other loss, and provide yourself some healthy, consistent strategies for closure. One, you want to name and validate the loss. You want to understand, like I had mentioned just now, like, this is a loss. This is how I am in pain and I am grieving. And even just saying that and making sure that you actually believe in that's very important for people around you to also understand. I am in a grief and loss period of my life. I am grieving the loss of this experience. And all that comes when you think about someone who's lost a loved one, or who's facing a big, like, capital L loss. What do you think of? How do you think of supporting that person? You think of, checking in on them. You think of making them a meal. You think of trying to make them enjoy like a happy moment, or just kind of lifting their spirits. Like, that's the energy that you should be receiving from your community. And that's what they need to know is their role in this experience. Naming it, allowing yourself to experience grief, and allowing those to support you in that is super important. Rituals for closure. This is just always the most effective, like, psychological component to grief and experiencing grief. Journaling, a symbolic act. I hear a lot about like planting and gardening. I don't do it, but I got to do it because everyone loves it and says it's super healing. And if you do it, tap into that. But like, let's say you have an experience where you have to end a journey earlier than you wanted to, or you experience a loss in your journey. Planting a tree in remembrance, keeping something that is memorable to just honor that experience. We don't want things like shoved away when it comes with loss, because the thing with loss is our minds are really good at putting it in a box and shoving it in the back. Our bodies hold on to it for a long time until they don't. And your body will remind you and let you know when it's done holding on to pain. So you want to make sure you have spaces for this. Writing letters to the intended parents or to yourself or to that child is also a very healing act, especially for individuals who experience like a later term loss. You already felt them, like you had that connection with them and maybe had a nickname for them. And this was a person in your life as well. So like ignoring that and just thinking that that wasn't true is more harmful than good. You know, if there's a way to connect, if there's a way to like close that chapter, that relationship, that's the encouragement. Reframing in your mind, super important. Shifting from I failed or I couldn't do this to I made a choice or I faced a circumstance that protected my health, my value, my life, my family. That is all true, right? And it's just a matter of reminding your brain to get away from the self-deprecating or the self like negative self-talk and moving toward no, I'm protected, my family's protected, my health is protected, I'm being faced with a circumstance that is good for me, even if it's terrible. Community connection, spaces like this, support groups, connecting with other people who've also faced early endings, that's can be a very lovely route for some. Just knowing that you're not alone and that you and how they've coped and maybe grab something from that. And then therapeutic support. So like if everything else doesn't feel like it's helping and you need someone to just really understand where you're at and how things are going and how it feels without a bias or without judgment, that's where therapists, they're great listeners, and especially someone who's familiar with third party reproduction can understand exactly the kind of pain that's associated with a loss like this versus like any other loss. So utilize that. You're also with a wonderful agency who really prioritize mental health and mental health support. So you have that at your fingertips. And I encourage all of you to just experience and use those resources if you need them. I'm moving on to my next stage, which is life after a completed journey. But I do want to just open the floor. Anything that comes up, thoughts, feedback, anything that was helpful maybe for you, like closing a chapter from either a prior match, from a failed cycle, from a loss.
I have some thoughts that are really more theoretical as they've never happened to me, but I know that they do happen. I realize that I had a miscarriage. I've never had a fetal transfer, but as I go into this next journey, I'm well aware of the possibilities. And so for me, I have a fear of abandonment by my IPs. Like I think about what if I did have that miscarriage, you know, at some point where I'm having to labor, I'm having to birth a baby, and like they're not there, you know, but I still have to give birth. I still have to go through all of this. And like, how will I cope with that, you know, if I feel like tossed to the curb, you know, after this super traumatic event? And, you know, I can't speak for what my IPs will need at that time, but I know what I will need is for them to check in on me. So when I hear these stories of surrogates, like kind of being ditched by their IPs when they've had any kind of the losses that you're speaking about, like I'm so torn, that would be traumatizing. And yeah. I'm sure some surrogates could say, yes, that's a little bit traumatizing that like we went through this and then they're just like, well, you didn't serve our needs, so see you later, while you're still the one having to adjust to all the different hormonal shifts that have happened, you know, that are still there, even if it's early on in the process. And I'm thinking in advance of those things because I am a labor and delivery nurse and I have helped patients through demises of varying stages. I'm like, that could be me, and how isolating that would feel. Like, or what if it's a termination for medical reasons? Like,
right.
You know, and I know that the agency has done some really beautiful things about, you know, being supportive in those times so that the surrogate doesn't feel abandoned, but it still would hurt so bad to not have my IPs at the very least checking in on my emotional health. So it's like a theoretical, I don't want to call it a fear, but something that has crossed my mind is like, wow, how am I going to cope with that if that happens?
Yeah. I think I appreciate you brought that into the room, because I think that's extremely valid. And I'm sure all of you have maybe thought about that in some fashion or form. I want to share, but I do want to know if anyone else wants to add to that, because I know we've had some people share about their experience.
I don't know. I'm still too early in my loss, so I don't really know what to say. It's just my first journey was really, everything went smoothly. Everything was healthy. I'm just told that by every doctor and nurse that I'm so healthy that this was unexpected and unpredictable. So
Thanks, Brittany.
I'm still learning how to cope with it.
Yeah.
And how to approach my IPs when it comes down to this.
Loss is so tricky, because everyone experiences it so differently. And with your intended parents, you get to know them through an experience, but like, even if it's early in your experience, you really don't know them too well, and they don't know you that well either. I'm a mental health provider, and so I see the value of these types of conversations early on, when we have sort of those mental health touch points, like when we do a joint consultation and we have your IPs and the carrier's partner, everyone's in the room, and we're like, hey, should we experience a loss? What do we need to know about each other? And we preemptively plan. That doesn't always get to happen, but I think everything around loss is just really complex. And so I hear your fear, Sarah, of like, well, maybe you didn't say it was a fear, but I hear your hypothetical of, what if I get there and I feel totally alone? That says sort of two things to me, if you're kind of thinking that. One is, you're looking for a certain type of intended parent, and that's going to be very important to be like spending time on and being honest with, because intended parents come in all shapes, sizes, and colors, right? Like, there are intended parents that really want to be fully connected and see this sort of in a long-term play of their lives, where you're part of them, they're part of you, and this is a forever thing. And there are some intended parents that are like, for whatever reasons, unable to connect emotionally to that extent, or will have guards or rails or just barriers up to that kind of emotional connection. And so when faced with something like loss, where all the emotions are raw, you have those who will run toward it, who aren't afraid of it, and who will want to be there for not only for you, but for themselves, and to understand it. You'll have those others who will run as far away from it as they can, because that is just something that is like fire to the skin and is unable to touch, to get near. And unfortunately, for some, you being a surrogate, you're the reminder of their loss, right? Their loss of having a child the way they wanted to, the way they planned to, the way they expected to. Even though you're someone in their lives that are entering to help build this future of family for them, at the same time, there's sometimes a paradox for some of you're the reminder that they can't do it themselves. And so that gets really tricky and complicated when loss is also added into the mix. I think that's a very valid thing to be worried about. I also think there are things like having those preemptive meetings, which with surrogacy that's part of the protocol, right? Like having those meetings with your intended parents after match, where it's like, no, we're talking about loss now. Like, what am I going to need from you? How could I support you? What do I expect? What do you need? And we're basically planning this out. Like, I'm going to need space. I'm going to need to disappear for a little bit. I'm going to need you to check in on me and make sure that I don't feel alone in this. There are things you can do preemptively to make sure that it's known what you need during those ups and downs. But unfortunately, with loss, there's also just so much unknown, because you know, I imagine, like Katie, like you had mentioned that you went through that second cycle and had that experience, and like that was hard for you. And I imagine you didn't think that maybe it wasn't going to be hard, or maybe it wasn't going to be as hard as it was. You know, you still obviously move forward from that and end up doing another journey with different IPs. So like, everyone's experience of how to navigate grief is just going to look super different. Communication, your agency, mental health support, those are going to be your safety nets in your journey as well. And luckily with your agency, all of that's available to you. So you know, just as a reassurance, you have those safety nets. Okay, let's talk about life after surrogacy. And I'm appreciative that there are some in here that have had that experience. It's funny how this one goes. So the transition can feel strange. Let's start with that, especially if you're a first-time surrogate. You've gone through this experience, you had birth, you had that version of what that experience was like for you. Maybe it was really positive, maybe it was positive, but like also, I don't know, maybe you're still trying to understand it. And maybe you're like, yeah, I'm never doing that again. So it's a spectrum and everyone's experience is super valid. But the thing with surrogacy, it's so intense, it's so purpose driven. Like many of us don't get an experience like that where it's like, this is what I'm doing for the next year and a half or 2 years or whatever the plan is. And this is how I'm committing to it. And I know there's other people involved and I know when it starts, I know when it ends, and it's very, very like framed. And that feels good for most. You're doing something amazing for other people. The sudden shift is quite dramatic though, for many people, where it's like, okay, I have given birth, this baby exists in the world. These are the intended parents, and now it's different. Communication looks different. Contact looks different. Nobody's checking in on me all the time. I'm not hearing from the agency as much. The doctors checked and said, I'm good. All right, get back to life. My family expects me to be back to normal. I got to go to a soccer game on Saturday. Like it's sometimes in a very abrupt transition to normal. And the sudden shift, I think, is what I hear most often of like, this felt so good and purposeful and happy and really validated and important and appreciated. And then I went home and had to do the dishes and took my kids to soccer and had to host my mother-in-law and things were just normal again. And like that feels strange. The hormonal, physical, and emotional recovery is all still happening postpartum. So like for those of you who are experiencing this the first time, and for those of you who have experienced this, you realize that like you're going to come home without a baby, but your body's not going to know the difference for a while. And your mind will be in cahoots with your body because your mind will be saying, no, I can rest. I'm fine. There's no baby here. And your body's like, nope, I know what to do here. I got to produce. I got to do this. I got to do that. And your body's still in that mode. And it takes a little bit of time for most people for the mind and body to connect and sync up and to understand like, no, we're not doing this. There's no child here. There's no baby here. But you're still going through all of those hormonal shifts. You're still going through that emotional recovery. You're still going through that physical recovery. And the important thing here that I like highlight and stress so much is you should be prioritizing postpartum the same way, if not better, than this time around than you did with your prior pregnancies. It shouldn't be a rush back to normal. You have just done something incredible. Your body has gone through a lot. Your emotional space is also kind of in a complex stage right now. And it could be hard to transition back to your life. It also could be different, your life and your identity. You could be figuring out like, gosh, I don't even know who I am right now. And that happens with every birth. I mean, at least for me, every time I gave birth to a child, I was like, who the hell am I again? Like, what do I like? It kind of just like gets jumbled up and you have to put it back together. That's the same thing for surrogacy. With identity and roles, I'm pointing this picture out, but like you might feel a sense of mission and purpose that now feels less present. It's almost like, okay, what do I do now? Like what would be important to me, and having to grapple with those questions. Friends and family may not understand the magnitude of what you've experienced. And this is the one that kind of hurts sometimes, where it's like, well, at least it's over with, right? It wasn't your baby. Yeah, you can, you're fine, right? And everyone else kind of doesn't understand that, like, yeah, there's no baby here, but I still went through this whole thing and I still need to heal and feel. Sometimes insensitive comments can be made and you're in that very raw and beautiful postpartum stage, and that might not be comforting. Some carriers might just feel a sense of emptiness after experiencing a surrogacy journey, despite having completed like an amazing thing for other people and having this whole positive experience. The absence of that could just feel quiet and lonely. I would love to hear if anyone connects or relates to any of these dynamics, those of you who've had a surrogacy journey.
One thought that just came to my mind is, and I know this isn't the case for everyone, but for me, although pumping was very challenging, for me, that ended up being a really beautiful like transition because I still felt like, I had a role to fulfill, like a job to do. Um, I felt like I was being productive, and my IPs live local to me. So we were still communicating a lot, not as much as during the pregnancy, but still a decent amount because they were checking in on me to see how pumping was going and coordinating meetup and stuff. So for me, that was a really nice like transition. It was like it slowed down, but not an abrupt stop. I still felt like I had, that purpose. Um, and then, so I always kind of say that like when I stopped pumping, to me, that was much more of like the end of my journey than when the baby was born. Because then a lot of those things you mentioned came up like, okay, now what? I spent the last 3 years, that's how long my journey was, a long one, 3 years focusing on this. And now what? Because now I'm done. So that was just one thing to add. Although pumping was hard, it was a really nice transition for me.
Yeah. No, I appreciate that perspective too, because I pumping is sort of like another journey for many people, right? Like it's something else. Like it could be really easy and breezy and natural for some, and for others, it's just this really challenging component. And the other part of this too is like coming out of surrogacy for you, Katie, your example points that like you still needed a connection to it, and breastfeeding might have been it, like a slow ease out.
Mhm.
Others, it may be more of an abrupt closure. Like, okay, I need to close this chapter. Like I don't want to pump, and I don't want to like immediately have contact. And you can send me a picture, but like I kind of need to go back into my bubble, my life, and I need this closure. And that's perfectly valid too. That can come on the intended parent side, but that's definitely something that can come from the carrier as well, of like, this was a lot. I kind of need to sit with this. I need to understand and process and just get into my life in a way that is more fulfilling to me. I think what also happens too is there can be that space of like, what am I doing now? What's my purpose? And sometimes that space is really hard to fill, and it can feel uncomfortable, it can feel weighted. And often what I've heard is sometimes if you're in that space too long, that's really the space that's like, what if I did another journey? Because have access, right? You're like, I know something that will make me feel important and purposeful, and I'll contribute in a major way. And I just saw it up close, and I know I'm capable. So let me do it again. And sometimes that space is where you tap into that. Oh, okay, I'll try this again. Um, and then after 2, I've heard many people be like, yeah, you're screwed. You're going to do it again. Sorry. And there will be 3, and there might be 4 unless someone stops you. But any thoughts about that component of it as well?
I pumped for 6.5 months for my surrogate baby. The intended parents would have loved me to pump more, but I was also dead set on doing a second journey. So had to I met my goal and then shift gears. And I'm really hoping and looking for the same experience, with the open-mindedness that you never know how it's going to go. And my IPs at this time are kind of undecided. I think all of this is very new for my IPs, so they haven't really thought that far yet. And I feel okay with that. But I'm already like, well, I'm gonna pump because I know I need to have that slower, less abrupt ending to the journey. And if the milk doesn't go to that baby, then I'm gonna figure out something else. There's lots of different avenues that I know about, but I also needed that slower ending to feel like a better sense of closure. It was very gradual, and we do still talk too.
Thank you. And I do want to point out that there's also this reality of your journey ending, and that means your relationship ending with your intended parents in some way or form, right? Like it's not as close. We're not talking as much. And sometimes that is a big shock factor too, of like, gosh, I liked these people, or I liked this person. And like, what a bummer that I don't get to like, we don't have anything to talk about yet, anymore. Like I'm not getting checked up on, and that felt good.
I definitely remember after my first journey, I didn't know how I would expect post or how I would feel, but I remember feeling that really kind of like a void, like a vacuum of it was something that occupied so much of my mental and emotional and physical energy. And then now I didn't have anything. And I was um, trying to understand what I was feeling. I actually ended up going and I had, I guess, postpartum anxiety and I got on medication for a time because of it, because I was so anxious about like what to do with myself, I think. And I wasn't expecting that. And I was so sad when my parents left because they stayed for a long time. And then they went back to Australia and then they were gone. And I felt like I didn't have any, like I had so much purpose. And then I felt like I had none. Of course, I still had all my regular purpose. I was still a wife and a mother and a teacher, and I still had everything. But in my next journey, I was ready for it in a different way. Like I was ready for that feeling. And I also planned a trip, like a big trip to Hawaii with my family. So I had that I was looking forward to. And I feel like the energy that I spent, like planning the travel and planning the excursions and talking about all of that was a good direction for me to point. Once I was done pumping, I was going to take this trip, and I pumped for like only 4 or 5 weeks, and then that really helped me. So then in my third journey, I did the same thing. I planned a vacation at the end, and that was a really helpful outlet for me. I felt like I needed something big to pour all of that mental energy and focus into, because I didn't want to experience that again. And I didn't pump after my first journey, which I thought was a good thing, but I think pumping in my second and third, it was so much easier. So I'm really glad I pumped on those later journeys. It made such a big difference for the shift.
Yeah. And the pumping, like just to kind of break it down too, like the pumping component comes from, I think, more of a biological place than a cognitive place, right? Like you're helping your body also transition out of what it was just doing for 9 months, 9+ months. And with pumping, there's benefits to like shrinking your uterus and kind of regulating your hormones. And so the pumping component, I think, on a biological level also just helps your body get synced up quicker to your mind and quicker to the reality that like, no, we're not in a child rearing stage. There's no baby to take care of here. I need my body to get back to a baseline quicker. And so, pumping, if that's like something you're thinking about or not a fan of, like I didn't have a positive experience of pumping, but I could see a perspective where like, if it helps my body get down to like a place where it could feel comfortable, I would attempt it, right? So that my body has this like biological release almost, while I'm still kind of cognitively coming back to a baseline of what my life is. Sunshine, I super appreciate you sharing your perspectives too, because that void, that like experience of it, like it's real and it can get quite heavy. And sometimes, you'll go back to normal life and be like, this isn't enough right now. Like I just had so much love poured into me and I had so much of this, and now I have to go back to do like the normal things. And like that could be a hard adjustment too.
It's like a big come down
Yeah.
from a big high,
Yeah.
And I think something that was challenging for me too was that I had a lot of people in my life that were like, see, I told you it was going to be so hard for you to give up the babies, and that's why you're depressed or that's why you're struggling now. And that wasn't it. And so I didn't feel like I could talk about it with people in my life that didn't fully understand surrogacy, because I didn't want them to blame me being a surrogate or say, see, I knew that was a bad idea, because it wasn't. I was still really satisfied with what I had done and still really proud. And I still really loved my journey, but I was just having this process that I had to go through that I wasn't really prepared for. And the journey was beautiful and perfect and nothing, but I didn't have a lot of agency support. I think that was a big part of the reason to why we like lean on you so much, because I don't think anybody should be alone in that, because some people don't have any other surrogates in their life or have any other community. Most of us don't ever meet other surrogates out in the wild, other than here in our online communities. We don't have anybody else to talk to about that. And so it can feel really isolating.
Yeah. And I love that you touch on that point too, where I think the biggest question that is asked on all ends, when someone's looking into surrogacy as a surrogate, it's like, how are you going to feel about the baby? Like, you're going to, is that going to hurt you? Like, how can you give up your child? Well, that's like the version that like they don't have much information on this, when they're like, how can you give a baby away? But then also that version of like, yeah, emotionally, what's that going to be like to give birth to a child that's not yours or that you're handing over? And I think what we really miss, I think where that question goes incorrectly, and where it's actually should be looking at, is like, how are you going to experience the loss of going through a pregnancy this way, and what happens afterward? When you have a biological child, you have a purpose after birth. You have to take care of that baby. And so there's no void. But when you have a birth without a child to take care of, there is that void. What does my mind and body do now? Where do I focus this energy? And your examples, Sunshine, I think are the ones that we hear positively, where like you do want to have something ready to go, right? Like it's a trip, it's a big event. Maybe you're starting a new class or a hobby, or like there's something there. There's something there that you can redirect energy, you can get excited about, you can put some of that effort toward, because you've been doing that for a long time. Your baseline's at this level, and it's going to be really hard for your mind and body to just stop, go back to level one, and like go back to this version of life that doesn't feel like it's as important.
And it's got to be something big, like remodel your kitchen or move house or something.
It's pretty healthy coping, right? Like you want to go back to feeling a purpose. So like whatever that could be in your life, like you want to kind of plan for that. Maybe you have something in mind. You just should wait until a surrogacy journey is over and do it then. But like having something ready for you at that finish line, for you to invest energy and time into, for you to healthily grieve and process while being in this like new stage of life, that's a good idea. I'm going to go to my next slide. Healthy transitions. We're kind of talking about this, but one, you're going to give space for reflection, allow yourself the time. If you're not taking maternity leave, or you're not planning on taking maternity leave, please reconsider. You want that time post-birth to feel and heal and see whatever it is that's there, no matter how your journey ended. You want people bringing you food, you want people coming to help clean your house, whatever it is, whatever that protocol was before, that's the same protocol here. You are resting, you're not going out too much. You should not be back to normal life, right? Giving yourself that space to feel and have your body heal, but also just to kind of think about the whole thing and see where you're going next. That's highly important. Staying connected if it's appropriate, right? Like maintaining that contact with intended parents, but also recognizing maybe I do need space initially, or maybe this actually isn't going to help me. Just knowing what you need in terms of support, and then obviously leaning into your family and friends. Marking the completion. This is where you're talking about a closing ritual too. So like maybe it's creating a memory book, maybe it's like gathering photos together, or having something that honors your experience. I heard this surrogate talk about something, and it's like forever in my brain. I wish everyone would do it. But in her culture, after 7 days, that's usually when everyone comes to like bless the baby. And like people will come and bring food, and it's like a special night. And in her experience, after 7 days, all of her family came over, and they came to do a similar ceremony, but it was just to bless her. And it wasn't for the baby, but it was still something that everyone in her family prioritized. And it was something that was meant to like provide her healing and comfort and, things like that. Like if you can, and if your family's along the road and willing to support you in that way, creating those memories or ritual, or even just an experience or a night where you're appreciated, you're taken care of, like that's super important. Rebuild your daily identity. This is a great time. We were talking about this with Sunshine. Explore new goals. Take a fun, big trip that you've been thinking about, like a hobby or a role that's been on your mind. This is where you invest in that. You kind of can't go back to normal life after surrogacy. There has to be something new and exciting there for you. That's really a great way to heal and move forward. And then acknowledge changes in self-perception. It's super normal to see yourself differently after surrogacy. And it's also very normal to not know who you are after surrogacy. Again, this rocks your identity, sometimes in a great way. So spending that time to understand, okay, what is it that I actually want to do with my life? Who am I? Do I need to change my environment? Like what needs to happen That is all perfectly normal and valid with this whole thing. And that's not unique to surrogacy, by the way. That's just unique to childbirth. Childbirth is intended to be transformational. It's the whole purpose of it. It's to transform your mind, body, and introduce life. So anytime you have that experience, you should be just reconsidering and adjusting life accordingly. Right. We have no more time. But any questions or anything that comes up? For those of you who joined and shared, thank you so much. This is like a hard topic, and I know there's someone in here specifically who's having a recent loss. I'm really proud of you for coming in here. I hope this is information you take, that you consider, that you use, and that you share if it's helpful to others. But thanks for being here.
Yeah. And we all love you. And I'm so sorry that you're experiencing that. I can't even imagine.
Yeah.
I'm not done yet. Hopefully the IPs will give me another chance.
I hope so too. I wish I could hug you.
I know.
Thank you.